Hello, back again. Welcome. Today we're going to talk about exponents and order of operations. This is stuff you're going to come across, you're going to need to deal with, and it's for some people it's a little new, so it's a little tricky, but if you get used to it, it's not so bad. I want to make sure you're clear exactly on what we do with a problem like this first. When you multiply, you start here and you go 2 times 2. That is equal to something. It's equal to 4, so that part of the problem can be replaced by 4. Then we go 4 times 2, and that part of the problem up to there will be 8. And then we go 8 times 2, and that part of the problem up to there will be 16 times 2, and that will give us 32. So you have to just multiply as you go across. I mean, that's what it says. So if you do it, you're okay. 2 times 2 is 4. Then that part of the problem right there is replaced by the 4. So then you move on to the next step, and so on. So, mathematicians, I said this before, they're efficient. They don't like to have to write all this out. Again, imagine what the math books would look like if you had to write that out every time. So somebody came up with the idea, and I'm not sure who did, but I'm glad they did, because they said, okay, let's take the number that we're multiplying, and then to tell us how many times we multiply that number by itself, which is what we did there, we're going to put a little number to the right and above. Now, this is something that's really important. It's easy to get mixed up on it if you're not careful. This 5 that we have over here, the only connection at all that it has to this problem is to tell you how many times you multiply that base number. The base number you're working with. So this is called the base. This is called the exponent. In other words, the exponent tells you how many times you multiply that base number times itself. Now remember, we talked about how numbers that we multiply together are called factors. So a nice simple way to say this, if you can get it straight in your mind, a nice simple way to say this is the exponent tells you how many times you take the base number as a factor. The problem is, I don't know whether our brains may be a little bit lazy or whatever, but they see this 2 and this 5 and they know it relates to multiplication, so the brain just says, oh, 2 times 5 is 10, and that's where you quit. Well, that's not the case, as you can see, because 2 to the 5th power is equal to 32. When we write it in this form here, it's called the exponential form. Does anybody have any questions about why that would be an appropriate name? Instead of, as compared to this, where it's just strictly multiplication, we're writing it in the exponential form. Or in other words, we wrote it with an exponent. So it's not complicated, just one of those things that worked out. Okay, we talked about that because we need it for what we're going to talk about next. So make sure you remember, the exponent tells you how many times you take the base number as a factor, or in other words, how many times do you multiply the base number times itself? Okay, so let's go on from there. I'm going to write a problem down here, and I want you to look at it and tell me what you get. Just look at it for a second and see what you think. Okay, now what I want to ask you, how many of you got 56? If you did, your brain is working basically the way it's been trained to work. Because we're so used to doing anything from left to right that what your brain's going to see is 3 plus 4, which is 7, times 8 is going to be 56. So that makes perfect sense to your brain for that to be 56. However, because of the nature of numbers and what we do with them, everything, that's not what the answer is. So it's a problem, and nobody questions the fact that it's a problem. So what we've got to do is somehow get to the point where we can get our brain focused to do it the way that it's supposed to be done. Now we'll go ahead and do what they talk about. There is an order of operations that we do first. For example, if I have 5 times 3 plus 2, we talked about that already, or 3 plus 5, that's what I wrote. I'm multiplying 5 times this group. Well, it just makes sense to our brain. We better find out what's in that group before we multiply it by the 5. So the first thing we do when we're dealing with numbers is we take care of any grouping symbols, and we're going to write a G there to remind us grouping symbols, because it starts with G. Okay, now if I say something like this, 4 plus 2 squared, what this says is, if I can write it right, is I want to add 2 squared to 4. Well, think about that for a second. Doesn't that tell your brain that you better find the squared part first before you do the addition? And that's exactly the next thing we do in the order we do operations in math. We do exponents next. Okay, now the next thing we do is multiplication and division. These two are kind of grouped together because division is multiplication. It's defined to be multiplication. It's just that we multiplied by the inverse. So multiplication and division are basically considered the same operation. So we just do them as we come to them, left to right. Multiplication or division, either one, doesn't matter. And the last thing we do is adding and subtracting. So this is grouping, this is exponents, multiplication, division, add, and subtract. But that's a lot to remember, so what we do, this is called a memory device, or called a mnemonic if you care, but it's just something that we do to help us remember. We just take the first letters of that and use them to give us a word that will help us remember it. So our word here is GEMDAS. Now some of you may heard of it as PEMDAS before, P-E-M-D-A-S, and what they do is they come up with a word for each one of those letters and make a sentence that's kind of unique and something that you'll remember. You may have heard, "Please excuse my dear Aunt Sally." You've heard that before? Okay, a lot of people have. That's the sentence you remember to remember the order of the letters. Now, I don't particularly like that one because I've seen with students, they get so focused on the P that the only grouping symbols they can think of are parentheses. And there are a lot of other grouping symbols. We have the fraction bars grouping symbol. We have brackets, braces, the radicals, and we'll talk about all those things are coming later, but there are a lot of grouping symbols besides parentheses. So I opted to use a G to remember that any kind of grouping symbol gets put in here. Now, that meant, of course, I couldn't use please excuse my dear Aunt Sally. So I had to come up with something else. And it's okay to, you can get just about anything you want that'll help you remember it. And sometimes the stranger they are, they're so strange that you can't get them out of your brain. Well, I came up with something that I figured I could use here, and it goes like this. Greta exhumed my dear Aunt Sally. I kept Aunt Sally still in the picture, but now Greta is exhuming her. And if you know what that means when you dig up a dead body. It's kind of gross, but it's one of those things that help you remember. So, grouping symbols, exponents, multiplication, division, adding, and subtracting. That is the order that we do operations in math in any given problem. So, I'm going to recommend to you that you put that on a card, and every time you do a problem where order of operations are involved, and that's any problem that has two or more operations. If there are two or more operations, it is going to be an order of operations problem. That you put that out there and you make yourself go through each one of these steps. And I'll show you what we do here. Looking at this problem that we put down first, I'm going to say, are there any grouping symbols? I don't see any. No parentheses, brackets, braces, fraction bar, any of those. So that's okay. I'm saying it because I'm trying to program my brain to remember it. Are there any exponents? Look up there. No exponents. Is there any multiplication? Now, I see a multiplication. So now what I've got to do is got to get my brain to focus on multiplication, because that is what I'm going to do next before I do anything else. Okay? So, I have to look at 4 times 8. 4 times 8 is 35. So I'm going to replace this part of my problem, the 4 times 8, with the 35 that it's equal to, and everything else will stay the same. So now my problem is 3 plus 35. There wasn't any division. There is an addition now, so that's what I'm going to have to do next. And 3 plus 35 is 38. So, put that on a card and get your card out, and every time you get a problem that has more than one operation, pull your card out and go through and say every step every time. The purpose of that is to program your brain, and you can do it, and then pretty soon your brain will have that program there just like a computer, and you will know that these are the steps you follow when you do a mathematical problem. So, let's see how that will help us. We'll just keep this over here so that we have available to us. And let's write down a couple of problems. Let's do a couple of problems and see where we get to. This is what our problem is, and there's a lot of stuff there, and sometimes that's a little bit hard for our brain to deal with. Because our brains, for some reason, want to process all of the information all at once. And what I want you to learn and understand is, one step at a time, it will be fine. You can handle focusing at one thing at a time. So if that's what you'll learn how to do, you'll be okay. So what we're going to do is we're going to look here at our list, ask ourselves if anything's there like that, then we're going to do that. So first of all, are there any grouping symbols? Yes, there are. Now there are two of them. We're not going to try to look at both of them at the same time. We start on the left with the one on the left. We do it, and then we move to the one on the right. And that's all we think about for that moment. I would recommend that you write down the rest of the problem the way it's going to remain so you don't lose anything. Now we're going to deal with that. 20 plus 4. That's not hard to do. We can handle that if that's all we're looking at. So I'm going to have 24. And now I'm going to deal with this other grouping symbol. And all I'm going to look at is what's inside the parentheses. That's my grouping symbol. And inside my parentheses, I've got 6 minus 2. Well, that's not hard. I can handle that. So that's going to be 4. So far, they're not difficult. Okay, now I'm going to go on to the next one. Are there any exponents? The answer is no. I don't care if there aren't any. I'm checking it anyway because I'm trying to get my brain to program that in. That's the second thing I check for. But I'm happy when I don't have to do a step. So I go on, is there any multiplication or division? So I look, and sure enough, there's a multiplication there. There's a division there. So that's what I'm going to do. And once I decide what I need to do, I go from left to right. So I'm going to start right here. I'm going to do that 9 times 4. That is 36. That's a subtraction, so I'm not going to do it now. But the next thing I've got here is this division. It's 24 divided by 8. And that is 3. So that whole thing there was replaced by that. It's like that whole thing was replaced by that. So now my problem looks like this. So, addition and subtraction, yeah? I don't see any addition unless you want to think of that as a plus. But basically now what I've got is 36, subtract 3. That's going to give me 33. And then I do 33 subtract 4, and that will be 29. What I want you to think about for a minute is what we just did, and I want you to think about the fact that as we did each of those steps individually, there was nothing in any one of those individual steps that was that hard. So, you can do these problems as long as you can stay focused. You've got to know the steps. Have them on a card or something so you can refer to it, and then make sure you do one step at a time. Find the thing you're going to do like we did here, the grouping symbols. Focus just on those and ignore everything else. If you can do that, your brain will be programmed so that it knows to do that. And then when we quit talking about it with the problems, you'll still be able to do the right thing. And when you just deal with one thing at a time, you'll be able to handle it. The numbers are going to be such that you'll be able to handle it. Take the time to learn this. This is really important. It's a problem area for a lot of people because they don't quite get it straight. But you want to have it so that you can use it. Hope it helps you. That's what I'm here for. I want to help you get to where you can deal with math and not have the problems that so many people do, because one step at a time, it was easy and it was fine. So, see you later. Thanks.